What was Paul's thorn in the flesh? Now, there are very different answers to this, and most people hold to the view that it was some sort of physical ailment, that Paul, due to certain things happening to him, that it was blindness. Because we know from 2 Corinthians 12, it talks about how he pleaded 3 times for God to take away this thorn in the flesh, but God responds by saying, "My grace is sufficient for you, and my strength is found and made known through your weakness." So I don't necessarily believe that it was a physical ailment. I think it had pertained more towards a sexual struggle. Now, we'll get to that in just a second, but it's very interesting that we see in 2 Corinthians 11 that right before he says that, in 2 Corinthians 11, he talks about how he went through many different perils. He was accused by the brethren. He was stoned. He received 39 lashes 3 times. He was shipwrecked. He's been in famine. And he just goes on and on about this, of what he has been through and what he has endured for the sake of the gospel. So he lays all that out, not in a complaining sense, but in a realization sense that, listen, I've been through all this because of God, but God has proven faithful, and I'm sharing the gospel. He's furthering his plan along through me. He shared everything of that. So that is right before. And then what comes after, in 2 Corinthians 12, he then talks about the thorn in his flesh. Now, had this been reversed, where he speaks about the thorn in the flesh, and then he goes on to talk about all the perils he's been through, that would make more sense, that it could potentially pertain to, his vision was blurred and whatever it may be. But rather, him talking about the perils and everything that he went through, that comes first, and then the thorn in the flesh. So what is the thorn in the flesh? I believe, and obviously we'll find out in eternity, but the thorn in the flesh is related to some sort of sexual struggle. We know that Paul was never married. He even said, I wish, and likewise, that you all would be like me, but those who get married do not sin. He recognized that many people have the gift of marriage, and then some people have the gift of singleness. And so, because he was single, there might be 2 things that were going on that were a thorn in his flesh. And what it talks about after God's response, when God says, "My grace is sufficient for you," it talks about how Paul was further going to boast all the more in his infirmities. And infirmity could be some sort of weakness or problem, not only physically, but also mentally. And so the thorn in the flesh could be that Paul might have struggled with homosexuality, in the sense of being attracted to the same sex. And therefore, because he had that, he was therefore not one to get married, because this was some sort of battle. Now, could he have gotten married if the Lord led him and all that? Of course. I have testimonies of people that I know that struggled with the same-sex attraction. Now they're happily married in a heterosexual family. They're Christians, and they have kids now, and they worked through that. But also, the thorn in the flesh could even be pertaining to masturbation. Obviously, there was no word for masturbation back then, but we know that Jesus, in the same time he talks about better to go into heaven with one eye rather than into hell with both, it's better to pluck out your own eye. Right after that, in the section of lust, he talks about cutting off your hand. It's better to cut off your hand and enter heaven with only one hand than going into hell with your full body and being destroyed. So this could potentially be a weakness that Paul had, because he was not able to exercise and express in a proper biblical marriage those sexual desires and the hormones that can tend to happen. Maybe that was a thorn in his flesh, where he needed to masturbate in order to relieve himself of the sin. Obviously, we don't know for sure, and we don't want to pin anything on Paul that isn't, but I think logically this makes more sense, that it was some sort of sexual struggle, because he was single until the day he died. He was never married, where he could properly be able to express and have that intimate bond with a woman, and to be able to enjoy sex. Instead, this could have been the thorn in the flesh. And God had permitted this. He didn't tempt Paul to do this. He didn't make Paul do it, but he permitted and allowed it in order to reveal more of his grace. Because if Paul never had a struggle insofar as a sin aspect, then he would be much more susceptible to pride and having a big head and saying, "Look what God is doing through my life." So God sometimes permits us to go through certain struggles in order to keep us humble and to keep us seeking after him. And we know that from Romans 2 and other places, Paul said, "The things I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't do, I want to do." I think I said that correctly. We know he always had this struggle between the spirit and the flesh, as do all of us. And so he always had this struggle of wanting to fulfill the things that he wanted to do for God, but not always having the ability to carry them out. And so this could be part of the reason, as far as the thorn in the flesh, to where it was more of a struggle of some sort of sexual sin, whether that was in the mind or an acting out of masturbation. So those are definitely potentials and what I think make the most sense. Obviously, there's different views on this, but what was a thorn in the flesh for Paul? I believe that it was either the struggle with same-sex attraction, which is not a sin in and of itself. The sin comes from lusting after the same sex. But that could have been the thorn in the flesh, or it could have been masturbation, since he was single and was never able to practice and have sex with a woman to whom he was married to.